I'm 29F and grew up in a family where Christmas wasn't just another holiday. It was treated like a tradition carved in stone. Every detail repeated year after year like a script. The tree went up the day after Thanksgiving, the same decorations were brought down from the attic, the same music played in the background. We all knew the rhythms of the season, and we all knew one thing for certain. My Aunt Linda, my dad's older sister, would find a way to make the holiday about herself. Linda is 56 now, but she's been the same since I was a kid. She branded herself as the generous one of the family. She wanted everyone to see her as the person who gave the best gifts, the most thoughtful surprises, the one who kept Christmas alive. On the surface, it might sound like a nice role to play, but the way she did it turned the holidays into a performance. Every year she would brag about how much she had spent. It wasn't just about giving, it was about making sure everyone knew the price tag. I remember one year at Christmas dinner when she leaned back in her chair, swirled her wine, and casually dropped into conversation. "That leather jacket I got you wasn't cheap, you know." She wasn't even talking to me that time. It was my cousin wearing the jacket, and the poor girl looked down at her plate, embarrassed, while everyone else just nodded politely. My mom rolled her eyes, but she didn't say anything. Nobody ever did. Linda's temper was sharp, and challenging her in front of others was asking for an explosion. But behind the glossy show she put on, the gifts themselves rarely matched the image she tried to sell. As I got older, I started noticing the details. Perfume bottles that were already half empty, sweaters with clearance stickers still stuck to the tags, gift sets that were clearly rewrapped from someone else. The worst was the year she gave my cousin a toaster oven. When he unwrapped it, crumbs spilled out on the carpet. He laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, but Linda just smiled and told him he was lucky because that brand is expensive. If anyone ever dared to point out things like that, she had the same line ready: "It's the thought that counts." And yet when it came time for her to open gifts, if she didn't get something flashy or high value, she sulked like she'd been cheated. She once unwrapped a scarf from me, something I'd saved up for, soft cashmere in her favorite color, and she sighed and put it aside without a word. 10 minutes later, she was boasting about how much she'd spent on my brother's headphones. For years, the rest of us went along with it. We pretended her gifts were wonderful, we smiled and thanked her, and we let her hold court with her bragging. It was easier to play along than risk turning Christmas dinner into a shouting match. That was the pattern of every holiday, and I started to dread the predictability of it. When I finally moved out and got my own place, I decided I wanted something different. I started hosting Friendsgiving with my friends from college and work. We'd do a little gift exchange where everyone pulled a name, and the rules were simple: fair budget, thoughtful gifts, no one-upmanship. People actually cared about what they gave, and the atmosphere was fun. Nobody bragged, nobody sulked, and for the first time, the holidays felt light. So when my parents asked me last year if I'd host Christmas for the extended family, I surprised myself by agreeing. I wanted to bring some of that same energy into my own family. At the same time, I knew it was also a chance to finally level the playing field with Linda. She'd spent decades setting herself up as the queen of Christmas, but in her world, there were never any rules. She could overspend, underspend, re-gift, and no one said a word. This year, that was going to change. I decided we would do a secret Santa. Everyone would draw a name, and each person had to buy a gift for that one person. I sent out the rules ahead of time so there'd be no confusion. The budget range was set: minimum $75, maximum $100. Every gift had to come with a receipt, taped to the box or slipped in an envelope. And most importantly, each gift had to include a short note from the giver explaining why they chose it. That way, it couldn't just be something pulled out of a closet or bought in a hurry at the clearance aisle. No excuses, no recycling old junk, no hiding behind vague gestures. When I typed it all up and hit send, I knew exactly who was going to hate it. Linda thrived on the chaos of no rules, but with a clear budget and required receipts, her usual tricks would be exposed. This year, she wouldn't be able to disguise a half-burned candle as a thoughtful gift. This year, there would be no wiggle room to brag about sacrifice while handing someone a sweater with the tag still dangling. The thought of it made me nervous, but also strangely relieved. For once, Christmas wouldn't revolve around her drama. Everyone would be on the same footing, with the same expectations. And deep down, I was curious. If Linda had to play fair, what would she do? Would she finally step up and buy something genuine, or would she crash and burn trying to hold on to her title as the generous one? Either way, I was ready to find out. When I first explained the Secret Santa rules to the family, most people were curious but open to the idea. We were sitting around my parents' dining table, the one we always used for family meetings and planning. I went over the budget range, the receipt requirement, and the part about writing a short note to explain the choice. My dad nodded along. My mom said it sounded fair, and my cousins seemed amused. A few even laughed at the idea of attaching a receipt, but it wasn't mocking. It was the kind of laugh that said they actually liked the structure. Linda, on the other hand, looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. She crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair, her face stiff. She didn't jump in right away, but everyone could tell she was waiting for the right moment to challenge it. Sure enough, after a few seconds of silence, she broke in, questioning why we needed so many rules. She claimed she'd always given the best gifts, and that this system killed the fun. Nobody rushed to back her up this time. My mom gently explained that the rules were about fairness, not competition. My cousins nodded, and even my brother said it would be nice to keep things equal. The more everyone agreed, the more restless Linda became. She looked around the table, almost daring someone to defend her, but no one did. Then, something surprising happened. Her own daughter, Emily, who was 27, spoke up. She said she was tired of getting random lotion bottles and clearance perfumes every year. The whole table froze. It wasn't that Emily had said something outrageous, it was that she had broken the unspoken rule of never calling Linda out. Linda's face went red, and she snapped back at her daughter, accusing her of being ungrateful. The table went quiet again, but this time it wasn't the usual awkward silence. There was a sense of relief, like someone had finally said what everyone had been thinking for years. The name drawing happened right after that. I made sure to handle it fairly so nobody could accuse me of stacking the deck. Everyone folded their names onto slips of paper, and we drew one by one. Linda pulled her slip, and when she unfolded it, I saw her expression shift. She tried to cover it up, but I caught it. She had drawn my mom's name. That was probably the worst possible outcome for her. her. My mom isn't confrontational, but she notices everything. She's the type who once returned a designer purse Linda had given her because it turned out to be a knockoff. She didn't scream about it or cause a scene, but she walked into the store, asked about it, and found out it wasn't real. Then she quietly told Linda she had returned it for something else. Linda hadn't spoken to her for weeks afterward. With my mom as her recipient, Linda couldn't slip by with a dusty candle or a half-used gift set without being noticed. The budget was set, $75 minimum, $100 maximum. I reminded everyone again that receipts had to be attached, along with the little note explaining the choice. My cousins found it funny, and even started joking about writing long essays for their notes. The mood around the table felt light, except for Linda. She was fidgeting, her foot tapping under the table. Every time someone mentioned how fun the exchange would be, her jaw tightened. She didn't argue anymore, but it was clear the idea unsettled her. Over the next couple of weeks, little signs started popping up that showed just how much the rules bothered her. My cousin Mark texted me a photo of the gift he had bought, sleek kitchen knives, neatly boxed and exactly in budget. He said he actually had fun shopping with a purpose. My brother bragged about snagging a smartwatch on sale and made sure the receipt clearly showed the final price within the limit. Linda, though, called my mom one evening, pretending to ask about holiday side dishes. In the middle of the call, she dropped a comment about how receipts weren't really necessary because everyone trusts each other. My mom didn't bite. She reminded her that the rules were for everyone and that it made the game fair. Linda dropped the subject, but not happily. 2 days later, I overheard her in the kitchen at my parents' house talking to her husband. She was whispering, but the walls aren't thick. She complained that the new system was humiliating and that she had no idea what to buy. She even said she might just get something from the back of the closet and hope nobody noticed. Her husband didn't respond much, just muttered something about playing by the rules, but she kept grumbling. As the days ticked down to Christmas, I could see the split growing in the family. My cousins, siblings, and even my parents seemed excited. They would text about what they bought, joke about who they thought had drawn their name, and share ideas for funny notes to attach. Linda, meanwhile, looked more tense each time the subject came up. At one Sunday dinner, she complained again that the system ruined the spirit of giving. My dad shrugged and told her the rules were already set. Nobody offered to change them. On Christmas Eve, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. She told me Linda had been acting strange all week, wandering in and out of stores, but never actually buying anything. Apparently, she had spent hours at the mall only to come home empty-handed. My mom suspected she hadn't bought anything yet, even though the exchange was the next day. That night, while I was finishing up my own wrapping, I couldn't help picturing Linda pacing aisles, trying to find a way to cheat the system. The image of her grabbing a dusty bathrobe off a shelf or sneaking something from her own house into a shiny bag felt almost too easy to imagine. Christmas morning came quickly. People started arriving at my place around noon, arms full of wrapped gifts and bags. The atmosphere was cheerful, filled with laughter and teasing about who might have drawn whose name. Linda arrived last. She carried a large decorative gift bag that stood out among the others. She dragged it into the living room and placed it right in the center like it was a showpiece. She mentioned that it had taken her a while to choose and hoped the person receiving it would like it. Nobody said anything, but I saw the sideways glances. It was the same pattern every year. She set the stage with a big entrance, trying to control the story before anyone even opened the gift. We began the exchange in order. My cousin unwrapped a knife set, perfect for her new apartment kitchen. My brother opened his smartwatch, and the room buzzed with excitement. Each gift came with a receipt taped or tucked in and a short note that made people laugh or smile. The system was working exactly as I had hoped. Then it was my mom's turn. She pulled the glittery bag closer, the bows catching the light. Everyone leaned in a little. Whatever Linda had brought was about to be revealed. My mom reached inside and pulled out a bathrobe, a pair of slippers, and a candle. At first glance, they looked fine, but then she held them up. The robe was thin and frayed at the edges. The slippers had clear wear marks on the soles. The candle had already been burned down halfway. The room went still. My mom stayed calm and polite, asking if there was a receipt so she could exchange the robe for another size. Linda hesitated, then claimed it was from a boutique that didn't give receipts. That might have worked if not for what happened next. My dad leaned forward, picked up the robe, and flipped the sleeve. There, still attached, was a clearance tag that read $12.99. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Christmas morning started the way I had hoped. People arrived one by one, arms full of wrapped boxes, gift bags, and trays of food. My cousins joked with each other in the kitchen, while my dad poured drinks and my mom made sure everyone had a seat. The tree lights glowed in the corner, and for the first time in years, the energy felt cheerful instead of tense. Everyone seemed curious to see how the new Secret Santa system would play out. Linda, of course, was the last to arrive. She walked in with her husband trailing behind her, carrying a massive glittery bag covered in bows. It looked like it had been decorated for a parade float. She made a show of struggling with it before dropping it right in the middle of the living room. In her usual dramatic tone, she announced that it had taken forever to find, but the person receiving it would absolutely adore it. It was her classic move, try to control the story before anyone even saw what was inside. We settled into the exchange. The plan was simple. Go in order so each person opened their gift, and the giver explained why they had chosen it. My cousin Emily went first. She tore the paper off a neat box and revealed a sleek set of kitchen knives. Taped to the side was the receipt, showing it was right in budget. Emily smiled as she read the little note aloud, explaining how her Secret Santa knew she had just moved into her new apartment and could use something practical. Everyone nodded, impressed. Next, my brother opened his gift. When the wrapping came off, the room buzzed. Inside was a smartwatch, brand new, with the receipt folded on top. The short note explained it had been chosen because he'd recently started running again, and it would help him track his workouts. People clapped, laughed, and made jokes about how fancy it was. You could feel the energy in the room build. The gifts weren't just items. They had thought behind them, and everyone appreciated the effort. One by one, the gifts continued. A cousin opened a record player, another unwrapped a personalized blanket, and even the kids got excited about puzzles and toys chosen with care. The receipts and notes made it clear that people had followed the rules, and for once there was no bragging, no side-eye, just pure fun. Then it was my mom's turn. She leaned forward, pulled the giant giant glittery bag into the center of the room and started pulling things out. First came a bathrobe, next a pair of slippers, finally a candle wrapped in tissue paper. At first glance, nothing seemed too strange. People tilted their heads, waiting for the note or receipt, but as my mom lifted the robe higher, the problems showed themselves. The fabric was thin, frayed at the edges, and the color looked faded. The slippers had scuff marks on the soles, the kind you'd only get from being worn already. The candle had been burned down nearly halfway, the wick short and blackened. The room went quiet. My mom kept her composure and smiled politely, asking if there was a receipt so she could exchange the robe for another size. Linda hesitated, her eyes darting around. Then she claimed it had come from a boutique that didn't give receipts. Nobody spoke right away. People shifted uncomfortably, and some tried to hide their surprise. Then my dad reached over, picked up the robe, and flipped the sleeve. Tucked inside was a small white tag. Written in bold red was the clearance price, $12.99. The silence that followed was heavy. My cousins glanced at each other. My brother leaned back in his chair. Even the kids seemed to sense that something was off. My mom placed the robe neatly back on the coffee table without saying anything else. The rest of the gifts sat waiting under the tree, but the focus of the room had shifted. It wasn't just that the robe was cheap, it was that Linda had tried to pass it off as something special. And with the new rules, there was no way to hide it. No receipt, no note, just worn items tossed into a flashy bag and paraded around like treasures. For a long moment, nobody moved. The contrast between the other gifts, thoughtful, new, carefully chosen, and the half-used items in front of my mom made it impossible to ignore. Linda sat stiffly on the couch, arms crossed, her chin raised as if daring anyone to question her further. Then my younger cousin broke the silence with a nervous laugh, trying to move things along. The next person opened their gift, a nice leather wallet with the receipt tucked inside, and the mood began to recover, though the tension lingered. People clapped and smiled, but glances kept drifting back to the robe, the slippers, the half-burned candle sitting on the table. Even as the exchange continued, it was clear the moment had landed. For years, Linda had bragged and boasted about her gifts. She had played the role of the generous one, the person who sacrificed the most. But now, in front of everyone, the truth sat in plain sight. A clearance robe, worn slippers, and a used candle passed off as thoughtful giving. Nobody said anything outright. The gifts kept coming. The laughter returned in waves, and the exchange wrapped up. But the silence that had fallen after the clearance tag reveal told the real story. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had understood. As the last gift was unwrapped, the pile of wrapping paper growing in the corner, Linda still hadn't moved. She stayed rigid, her eyes fixed straight ahead, as if pretending the moment hadn't happened. But the glittery bag, once meant to impress, now stood out like a spotlight. For the first time in years, Linda's performance had slipped, and this time, nobody was willing to play along. The living room was frozen after my dad turned over the sleeve, and the red clearance tag glared up at everyone. For a moment, nobody even breathed. Linda gave a short, nervous laugh and waved her hand like it was all a mix-up. She claimed she must have grabbed the wrong bag on her way out. My mom didn't miss a beat. She picked up the slippers, turned them over in her hands, and showed the worn soles to the room. The fabric around the toes was flattened, the kind of marks you only get from being broken in. She set them back down on the table as calmly as if she were pointing out a spot on a napkin. One of my cousins reached for the candle, lifted the glass, and tilted it toward the light. The wax inside was uneven, the wick already shortened and black at the tip. She placed it back down with a small frown and said flatly that the candle had already been lit. The color rushed to Linda's cheeks. She raised her voice, insisting the items were still perfectly good. But the cheerful buzz that had carried the exchange until then had completely evaporated. Nobody laughed, nobody agreed. Instead, there was that low shifting silence of people realizing at the same time that they'd been watching the same show for years and finally seeing the strings. A younger cousin broke the tension first. Under his breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear, he muttered about how much for the best gifts. A couple of people snorted into their cups, unable to hold back. Linda straightened her back and started doubling down. She claimed she had spent hours shopping, that boutiques never give receipts, and that people were being unfair. She painted the picture like she had been out doing everyone a favor and no one appreciated it. My brother, sitting across the room, leaned forward and spoke evenly. He explained that every legitimate store gives receipts, and that was the entire point of the new system. The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't out of fear, it was agreement. Heads nodded slightly. Nobody stepped in to save her. It sank in quickly. This wasn't an accident. Linda hadn't grabbed the wrong bag. She had recycled old things from her house and wrapped them in bows, passing them off as thoughtful gifts. And now, in front of everyone, the lie had cracked open. My mom folded the robe carefully and set it on the coffee table. She thanked Linda in the same tone she might use to comment on the weather, polite but clipped. The way she stacked the robe and slippers beside the candle made it clear she was done engaging. The silence stretched long enough that the kids squirmed in their seats. My aunt stared straight ahead, her arms crossed tightly. Her husband sat beside her, looking like he wanted to shrink into the couch. Finally, the exchange had to move forward. It was my turn. I picked up my gift from the pile, peeled off the paper, and opened a leather-bound journal with my initials pressed into the cover. The note tucked inside explained how the giver knew I liked writing lists and keeping track of things, and thought this would be something personal I could use daily. The weight in the room lifted slightly as people leaned in to look at the journal. They commented on how thoughtful it was, how the personalization made it special. I flipped through the clean pages and set it on my lap, thanking the giver by reading their note aloud. Around the room, more gifts followed. A cousin opened a small set of baking tools. Another unwrapped a family board game, and each one came with its receipt and note. The warmth started returning, bit by bit, but the earlier cheer wasn't the same. The robe, slippers, and half-burned candle still sat on the table like evidence no one wanted to touch again. Linda didn't react to any of it. She stayed rigid in the corner, her arms crossed, lips pressed tight, refusing to look at the pile of thoughtful gifts around her. Each time the room applauded or laughed at another clever choice, she only sat deeper into the couch cushions, her eyes locked on some point in the distance. By the time the last gift was unwrapped, the story of the day had already been written. Every family member had followed the rules. Every gift had been new, in budget, and explained with a note that showed real effort. Only one stood apart. The glittery bag that had been paraded into the room with so much drama had turned into the quiet symbol of everything people had tolerated for years but no longer could ignore. Nobody called it out directly, but nobody needed to. The clearance tag, the worn soles, the half-used candle, they had spoken loud enough. The cheerful atmosphere didn't fully recover, but the rest of the exchange closed smoothly. People stacked their boxes, folded the wrapping paper into trash bags, and started tidying up while conversations shifted to dinner plans. Linda stayed on the couch, arms crossed, as if carved in stone. She didn't get up to help, didn't join in the small jokes, didn't acknowledge the laughter that slowly bubbled back as people admired each other's gifts. For once, she wasn't the center of the room. The robe, slippers, and candle remained where my mom had placed them, untouched and unmoved. The rest of the family busied themselves with the wrapping paper and plates, letting the evidence sit quietly in the open, as if pretending it wasn't there while making sure everyone saw it at least once more. By the time dinner was ready, the gift exchange had ended, but the fallout was only beginning. Dinner was served soon after the gift exchange ended, but the air in the dining room carried the same heaviness from earlier. The clinking of silverware sounded louder than usual, filling the spaces where conversation should have been. My mom brought out the turkey and side dishes, trying to create some normalcy, but the shift in energy couldn't be hidden. People filled their plates, but their eyes kept drifting toward the living room where the robe, slippers, and half-burned candle still sat untouched on the coffee table. Linda stayed quiet through most of the meal, only breaking the silence to mutter small complaints about the food. She picked at her plate, occasionally moving food around instead of eating much of it. Whenever my mom complimented a dish someone brought, Linda raised her brows or gave a half smile, but her focus wasn't on the food. She kept glancing across the table, her eyes fixed on me, sharp and cold. It didn't take much to see where she placed the blame. My mom tried to redirect things by praising the stuffing, asking my cousin about her new job, and encouraging the kids to tell stories about school. The effort worked in bursts, but whispers still floated across the table when people thought they weren't being overheard. A cousin's husband leaned toward me, his voice low, and commented that the rules I had set had actually saved Christmas from turning into another year of fake generosity. He gave a small nod toward Linda without saying more. The plates passed around, but the tension grew heavier the longer dinner stretched. The sound of chairs creaking and the scrape of forks seemed louder than usual. My dad tried to lighten the mood with a story from work, but halfway through, Linda abruptly set down her fork and announced she had forgotten dessert. Without waiting for a reply, she pushed back her chair and left the room. The front door opened and slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the house. Nearly 20 minutes passed before she returned. She came through the door carrying a plastic grocery bag with a white bakery box inside. She set it on the counter with exaggerated care, then carried it to the table like it was a centerpiece. She announced proudly that she had brought a cheesecake for everyone and hoped people appreciated the effort. The lid flipped open, revealing a cheesecake that looked store-bought and slightly uneven. The clean cuts showed it had been served earlier, and the cardboard bakery label was still attached to the box. People exchanged quick glances, their eyes darting from the cheesecake to each other. A cousin muttered under his breath that she hadn't even bothered to remove the label. My dad coughed into his napkin, his shoulders shaking as he tried to hold back a laugh. A few people hid smiles, but nobody said much. The pattern was impossible to ignore now. First the robe, then the slippers, then the candle, and now a half-eaten store-bought cheesecake presented as homemade. The cracks in Linda's performance were widening with every move she made. Dessert was served, but few people ate more than a bite. The conversation shifted away from her entirely. People leaned into smaller side talks, discussing movies, work, or plans for New Year's. Linda sat stiffly, cutting herself a large slice of cheesecake and pouring a full glass of wine. She drank quickly, then refilled it, her face tight. Between sips, she muttered about ungrateful people and how no one understood how much effort she put into the holiday. Her comments weren't aimed at anyone in particular, but they floated over the table like smoke, impossible to ignore. A few people exchanged glances but chose not to respond. Finally, her daughter Emily snapped. She set down her fork and looked across the table, her voice clear. She told her mother that effort didn't count if it came from the back of a closet or a bakery shelf. The words landed like a crack of thunder. The room froze. Every eye turned to Linda. She didn't move at first. Then, in a sharp motion, she stood, grabbing her purse from the back of her chair. Her face was pale, but her jaw was clenched tight. She hissed that maybe next year someone else could play Santa if nobody appreciated her generosity. The scrape of her chair echoed as she pushed it back. Without another word, she stormed toward the door, her heels striking the floor in quick, sharp steps. The front door slammed behind her, rattling the windows. The dining room sat in silence, broken only by the faint clatter of dishes and the muffled sound of the kids whispering at the far end of the table. The cheesecake sat untouched, the missing slices glaring at everyone like proof of everything that had just unfolded. Dinner limped on, but nobody was focused on the food anymore. The robe, slippers, candle, and now the cheesecake had written the evening's story. Everyone had seen it, everyone understood it, and nobody rushed after Linda to smooth things over. By the time plates were cleared, the night had shifted. The holiday wasn't ruined, but it wasn't what it had been at the start. The rules had revealed what had been buried for years, and Linda had stormed out rather than face it. The table stayed quiet, each person processing in their own way. But one truth hung unspoken in the air: things wouldn't go back to the way they were before. After Linda stormed out of the dining room with her purse slung over her shoulder, the slam of the front door rattled the house. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Forks stayed on plates, drinks sat untouched, and all you could hear was the faint hum of the heater in the background. Her husband finally broke the silence. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his forehead, and muttered that she'd been pulling stunts like this for years. It wasn't said with anger, more like someone admitting a truth he'd been carrying for too long. He went on to explain that she did the same thing at his office parties, re-gifting, wrapping up things from around the house, even giving out half-empty wine bottles once. My mom turned toward him, her eyes wide. She asked if he really meant this wasn't just something she did with family. He nodded, looking tired. He said Linda avoided spending money whenever possible, but always wanted credit for being the most generous person in the room. That unlocked something at the table. My cousins started sharing their own stories. One talked about the year Linda gave her a set of of makeup palettes that turned out to be expired. Another remembered unwrapping a mug with a chip in the handle. Someone else brought up how she once gifted a DVD that wouldn't even play because it had scratches all over it. Each memory landed with a mix of disbelief and recognition, the kind of moments that suddenly made sense in hindsight. Even the kids got involved. One of them piped up that last year their new toy still had a sticky spot on it where another kid's name had been written in marker. Everyone exchanged looks. The picture was becoming clear. It wasn't just a one-time slip with the robe, slippers, and candle. This had been Linda's pattern for years. She scavenged, re-gifted, or bought the cheapest clearance item she could find, then wrapped it up with bows and acted like she had made the ultimate sacrifice. And the rest of us had played along, too scared of her temper to call it out. There was a strange sort of relief in the room as the stories piled up. People laughed at some of the absurd details, shaking their heads. My dad finally raised his glass and made a dry joke about the great robe reveal, and that broke the tension. The whole table chuckled. The first genuine laugh since dinner had started. My mom leaned closer and whispered that it was overdue, that the truth had finally been laid bare. Around the table, shoulders relaxed as more people joined in the jokes. Someone imitated Linda's dramatic entrance with the glittery bag. Someone else mimicked her claim about boutiques not giving receipts. The mood shifted from heavy to almost giddy, as if years of pretending had suddenly lifted. One of my cousin's husbands suggested that we keep the Secret Santa rules for every holiday moving forward. No exceptions, no free-for-alls, just the same clear budget, receipts, and thoughtful notes. Everyone agreed immediately. The system had worked. It had revealed the truth and given the rest of us permission to stop enabling her. Emily, Linda's daughter, sat quietly through most of the conversation. She looked torn, like she wanted to laugh along but also carried the weight of being the one directly connected to her mother. When people noticed her silence, she finally spoke. She admitted she had spent years covering for Linda, making excuses, pretending the gifts were fine when they weren't. But now she said she couldn't do it anymore. The robe on the table had made it impossible to keep up the act. The room softened toward her. A few people nodded, and my mom reached over to squeeze her hand. It wasn't her fault, everyone seemed to agree, and it was clear she felt lighter just being able to say it out loud. The rest of the evening carried on with a different tone. People poured more wine, cleared plates, and kept the laughter going. The robe, slippers, and candle stayed in plain sight on the coffee table, like a reminder of everything that had just shifted. For once, nobody rushed to cover for Linda. Nobody suggested we smooth it over. She had walked out, and the holiday kept moving without her. When dessert plates were gathered up and coffee brewed, conversations flowed easily again. People joked about the cheesecake with missing slices, calling it the half-baked dessert. Others teased each other about their secret Santa notes, laughing at the thought of writing fake essays for next year's exchange. Linda's husband didn't leave with her. He stayed at the table, eating slowly, listening more than speaking. At one point, he sighed and admitted that he was tired of the act too. He said she never listened when he asked her to stop, that every holiday turned into a performance, and he was the one left cleaning up the mess afterward. Nobody pushed him for more, but his words hung in the air. By the time people started putting on coats and gathering leftovers to take home, the atmosphere had completely shifted. What started as tense had turned into something close to hopeful. The truth had been aired out, and the family finally felt united instead of divided by Linda's showmanship. The night ended with hugs at the door and promises to keep the Secret Santa rules for next year. The kids were excited about their new toys. The adults felt satisfied with their thoughtful gifts, and even the older relatives admitted it had been one of the most balanced gift exchanges in years. As the last cousin left, the house grew quiet again. The only sounds were the dishwasher humming in the kitchen and the faint laughter still echoing from the night. The robe was still folded on the coffee table, untouched, with the clearance tag still hanging from the sleeve. It was more than just fabric. Now, it was the symbol of what had finally been revealed. For the first time in a long while, the holiday had ended without Linda's voice dominating the room. A week later, my mom hosted New Year's brunch, hoping to bring the family back together after the strange Christmas dinner. She decorated the dining room with fresh flowers, brewed coffee, and laid out plates of pastries and fruit. One by one, people arrived, carrying small dishes and chatting in a lighter mood than the week before. The memory of the robe and the cheesecake still lingered, but there was relief in the air that Linda wasn't there to dominate the room. She showed up late. The sound of her heels on the porch was followed by the front door swinging open. In her hands was a giant basket wrapped in shiny cellophane, tied with gold ribbon. She carried it with both arms and set it down in the center of the room, like she was unveiling a prize. With a dramatic tone, she announced that this was what generosity looked like when people actually appreciated her. The basket looked impressive from a distance. There were bottles, boxes, and neatly arranged items peeking through the clear wrap. At first glance, it looked like something from an expensive gourmet store. People leaned forward, curious, but within seconds, the details started unraveling. The wine bottle inside had a faded label, dust clinging around the edges. The chocolates in the box had a broken seal, and when someone tilted it slightly, it was clear that they weren't fresh. The spa products were half empty, their labels worn, some caps sticky with residue. A candle in the middle looked just like the one from Christmas, its wick shortened and uneven. My cousin reached into the basket, lifted one of the bottles, and turned it in her hands. She asked if it came from Linda's bathroom cabinet. The room gave off a ripple of nervous laughter, the kind that came from people who already knew the answer. Linda's face flushed. She insisted it was from a boutique downtown, rare items you couldn't just buy anywhere. But before she could finish, my brother leaned closer, grabbed the basket, and tipped it slightly. On the bottom, stuck to the wicker, was a discount store sticker. The price tag was still visible, written in bold black marker. The air went flat, not shocked, just drained. Everyone had seen this pattern enough now. The robe, the candle, the cheesecake, and now the basket of dusty, half-used items with a thrift store tag still attached. The silence wasn't suspense anymore. It was exhaustion. Her husband finally spoke. He didn't raise his voice, but the firmness in his tone cut through the quiet. He told her she was embarrassing herself in all of them. His words landed with finality. For the first time, she had no cover. Linda's eyes filled with tears, and she started shouting that the family had turned against her after everything she had done. Her words bounced off the walls, but nobody responded. Nobody tried to comfort her. Instead, people looked away, fiddled with their cups, or turned to one another. The performance that once commanded attention now had no audience. She grabbed her coat, clutched her purse, and declared that she was done with ungrateful people. She stormed toward the door, the sound of her heels echoing again, and left the basket sitting in the middle of the table. The front door slammed once more, rattling in its frame. For a moment, nobody moved. Then my mom broke the silence. She poured herself coffee and said calmly that generosity wasn't about the price, it was about sincerity. The words cut cleaner than anything else that had been said. Emily, Linda's daughter, finally spoke. She admitted that they had all been pretending for too long, and that she couldn't keep covering for her mother anymore. Her shoulders relaxed as the words left her, like the weight had shifted. Around the table, people began sharing. They admitted they had known for years, but never said anything. They spoke about letting Linda's temper control the holidays, about how exhausting it had been to act grateful for things that weren't gifts at all. Nobody tried to excuse her this time. Nobody followed her out the door. The basket sat untouched in the center of the table. Someone joked about the basket reveal, and the room finally let out real laughter. My dad made a crack about auctioning it off to the highest bidder, and more laughter followed. The tension that had hovered over every holiday gathering for years started to fade. Brunch carried on, plates were filled, mimosas poured, and conversations turned to work, travel plans, and the kids. For once, the background noise of chatter wasn't interrupted by Linda's voice pulling focus. It was steady, even, and light. My mom decided that from now on, every holiday would follow the structured exchange. The budget, the receipts, the notes, those rules were staying. Everyone agreed without hesitation. Nobody wanted to go back to the old way. Emily hugged me quietly before she left. She didn't say much, but the relief on her face said enough. The family had finally stopped enabling the act, and she no longer had to carry the burden of pretending for her mother. By the end of the day, the basket was still on the table, untouched. Nobody claimed the dusty wine, the missing chocolates, or the half-used bottles. When the last guest left, my dad picked it up, shook his head, and set it by the trash. That was how the holiday season ended. Not with drama, not with shouting, but with peace. For the first time in years, there had been laughter around the table that wasn't forced. And while we all knew Linda would resurface eventually, it no longer mattered. Her performance had finally lost its audience.